Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Pope Metallicus, and welcome back to Rock and Roll Religion, where we've got a little bit of a deep cut for you guys today. These guys are pretty influential in terms of who they know and who they ran with, and who some of them ended up being part of. But the band themselves have kind of gone unnoticed, and I think that's a shame because they're a fantastic band. And we, of course, are talking about Racer X out of Los Angeles, with some of their members going on to be pretty significant and in pretty significant bands, especially Scott Travis, their drummer, who would go on to be in Judas Priest from 1990 to today. And joining me to help me do that is the Union of Amateur Strategists, the artist formerly known as Xenomorph.
The artist formerly known as it. Yeah, great. Thanks. And
How's it going, man?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I really enjoyed listening to this band. This is a great band.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are an absolute treat, especially for guitar nerds, because Paul Gilbert is an absolute monster.
If you like riffs, you need to listen to this band. Seriously. They got some serious riffs on here.
Well, I mean, right off of Street Lethal, they have the song YRO, which stands for Yngwie Ripoff. And that's not according to me. That's according to Paul Gilbert. So he wrote the damn thing. So
all right. Well,
so and he is actually mentioned up there in conversation with guys like Yngwie Malmsteen as part of the neoclassical guitarist movement, and you can really hear the classical and Baroque influences with this band. With how they phrase things and a lot of the solos and stuff like that. Very arpeggio heavy, like, oh, it's just beautiful.
I mean, some of the ways he does the guitar riffs could probably be played on harpsichord. Actually, that's
what it's meant to imitate, basically.
Yeah, that's what I think. So yeah. I mean, I haven't done the background into it like you have, like the research,
a lot of tapping, a lot of sweep picking, a lot of really, really cool arpeggios like that, and it's really, really cool. And I really dig his style, which makes sense because I'm a big fan of Yngwie Malmsteen as well. And a lot of Swedish guitarists end up playing like this. And getting into the first record, we have, one of their best releases, I would say, if not the best, Street Lethal, which, oh man, what a freaking entry into the scene.
Yeah.
Coming out on the 1st of January, 1986, starting the year off right.
That's it. That's where it's at.
Like, you start off with Frenzy and then go right into the title track in a way that's just beautiful, where they just slowly dial it in. And Paul Gilbert's skill is on display pretty much from the first second of this record. And it just doesn't let up.
Paul Gilbert, throughout the entire discography of Racer X, for the most part, I have one album that I'll say is an exception, does not let up.
Yeah. I mean, usually, like, there are moments, like there are slower tracks in some of the later albums, and like, they do a lot more different musically. Like, there's a lot more different styles on some of their later records, but this one is just pure balls to the wall speed metal, and I absolutely adore it for that reason.
Me too.
Like, be warned. If you listen to this album in the car, you are going to get a speeding ticket. It's gonna happen.
Yeah. I love playing Cyberpunk or another game like that, or actually Mad Max. That's the perfect game. Go and play Mad Max. Listen to some Racer X.
That's got that perfect aesthetic for it too. Especially for a band from the American Southwest. Most of them are either from LA or Phoenix. And just that motif of, the desert with freaking beat up muscle car.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like, you could easily picture them, like, literally being in that mentality. And especially in the 80s with all the leather and denim around.
Yeah, I grew up watching stuff like Mad Max, and one of my favorite movies growing up was Mad Max 2. Here in America, they call it the Road Warrior. Yeah.
Amazing movie.
Amazing. And
so great.
This is a song I would have loved to take in my Camaro, my 74 Camaro, and just blaze down the street with.
Excellent. That would have just been fucking outstanding. And like, there's a lot of great tracks off this record. Like not just Street Lethal, pretty much everything on this album rocks.
Hey Fizz.
Hey Fizz, how's it going, man? But before we get too far into it, I did have something I wanted to get to before we get into the discussion. Yesterday it came to my attention that one of the earliest subscribers of this channel, and a guy I've been talking to pretty much since minute one of this experience on YouTube, and a guy I actually was running a Fallout Australia campaign with, RPG campaign with for a while, has sadly passed on this weekend. So Loud Space 6666, gonna miss you, man. I really enjoyed a lot talking to you, and that game we had going was great. We had a good crew. It was a lot of fun, and I'm really sad to see to hear you go. And so rest in peace to him.
Rest in peace.
And like, it's unfortunate because he actually had his own game system that he developed for Fallout Australia that was actually very good. It was really fun. It was really easy to use. I'll see if I can find it on Discord after the show because I'm actually in the group still. Oh, cool. I just couldn't make it happen with the schedule.
I feel you there.
But no, I'm really gonna miss him. He was a good dude.
So you were in the Fallout based gaming group, like it was like a Fallout mod, or
no? This was Fallout tabletop RPG.
Oh, Fallout tabletop.
Yeah, set in Australia.
Awesome.
So,
well, the reason why I was asking is because I actually have a couple of videos on my channel of Hearts of Iron 4 with the Old World Blues mod.
Yeah, like I've seen that mod. It's freaking great.
It is, yeah. And
the things that happen in that game are absolutely stellar.
Oh yeah,
they're comedy gold.
My favorite Fallouts are Fallout 1 and 2. So that tells you how long I've been playing.
Oh yeah. I started with 3 by accident. I'd never heard of Fallout, and then I managed to. I was in GameStop the day it came out, just looking around, seeing what was new, and then like they were just like, "Oh well, this came out today," and I looked at the wall, and it was the art for Fallout 3. I'm like, "Yeah, sure, we'll give that a shot."
Yeah,
and then
I like Fallout.
Once I loved 3. I really fell in love with the universe, so I just went down the rabbit hole with it, and I really liked his take on it because it's like what would happen on the other side of the world, because like Australia has weird enough critters already.
Oh yeah.
Like now add radiation in there, and we had some interesting things like drop bears were a real thing.
Oh man.
It was a great system, and we had a lot of fun doing it. But,
yeah, that does sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and if they keep the Discord open, I will try to see if we can't salvage some stuff from that and try to see if we can't keep that alive, because I think that'd be really cool.
It would be, yeah.
But yeah, getting back to the record. Oh man, this was the killer debut, and unfortunately, this is the only album that Scott Travis isn't on. This is their original drummer, whose name I am not really able to pronounce because he's Austrian, and he was in the band right up until this record, and then apparently his visa ran out, so he had to leave. So then they got Scott Travis to play drums, and that goes into this record, which was February 11th of the next year. I was 1 day old when this record was released, being Second Heat. This one's an interesting one where it's kind of a follow-on and a little bit more variety than the original or than the debut album.
Yeah, that's the only reason I probably didn't like it, is because I was liking the speed before.
That's true. But I do like it when bands can, you show them what you can do in your main line on your debut record, and then kind of branch out a little bit and see how you can evolve that sound and play around with it and do something different. Like there's stuff on here, especially towards the tail end of the record, that wouldn't sound out of place on a Van Halen record.
Yeah, actually, I would say some of it would probably have been good in some like major 80s movies too. I mean, as like, theme songs even.
Oh yeah.
I'm not taking anything away from Racer X when I say it's not, I don't like it as much as the first album. Still very, very good.
Yeah, like they're
one of the best ones. Yeah.
Let's get this out of the way, especially musically. There are no bad records from this band.
No, there aren't. Sure did he.
The vocal style later on, I'm not as big a fan of, but it's still
Same
pretty
here.
good. I think it's just kind of a victim of its time, being the mid 2000s.
I agree. Yeah.
And it kind of developed a little bit of that new metal vocal style, but musically, it's still lights out because it's Paul Gilbert and he's basically a genius.
So. And there's a couple of songs on the newer albums that I think are actually an improvement, but only a couple, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's the thing when you play around with your sound and experiment a little bit is sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it isn't.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you get, scarified or, a song that they actually, I thought was an original by them, but it turns out it was actually written by Priest and left off of Turbo, being Heart of a Lion.
Yeah.
Which was it's a great track when they do it. It's an even better track when Rob Halford did it. And it's funny that this was actually originally a Judas Priest song that they never recorded. They gave it to Paul Gilbert because him and Rob were friendly. RACER X recorded it, and then Scott Travis went on to be in Judas Priest. And then after all that, Rob Halford was the one who covered it. So the guy who originally wrote it did a cover of his own song that it was originally recorded by another band.
Yeah, only in the music industry in Hollywood and all that will you get that
yeah,
convoluted.
Only in the 80s metal scene would you see that sequence of events.
Yeah. But I'm glad that they managed to get it done because excellent music.
Yeah, and unfortunately, these guys were only really active in the LA scene from 84, it looks like, to 89. And then, they did this out, these first two records. They did, I think, a tour supporting this one. And then they kind of all went their own way. Scott Travis ended up in Judas Priest just in time for Painkiller, which, if you guys have been watching this channel for more than 5 seconds, I will extol the virtues of that album pretty much all day. And I think he brought some of that RACER X sound into Judas Priest.
I've listened to Little Judas Priest, but I need to revisit them after listening to all this. Honestly, I need to revisit some Judas Priest after.
Oh yeah, I would start with Painkiller because that's where Scott kind of comes in, and you can kind of hear that a little bit more aggressive tone start really coming to the fore again in Priest. Because I think they were in need of a new sound after Turbo. Ram It Down was going in the right direction, but wasn't quite there. And then you have Painkiller that came out in 1990, and it's just lights out from start to finish, just absolute speed metal anthems throughout.
Yeah.
So so that is, I think, where RACER X was heading, but never got to.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, the 90s happened. Metal kind of died off as a genre because all of the record labels were busy promoting grunge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in 1999, after most of the grunge era was over, unfortunately Priest was on a hiatus at that point. So, and fortunately for RACER X, because they all kind of got back together, and then here's a good picture of the band in their prime. And that's right. I overlooked that. On this record, they also have Moon Age Daydream, a cover of a David Bowie song, and a damn good cover too.
Yeah.
It's hard to cover Bowie because he's kind of a unique artist in and of himself, but I'm impressed that they tried, and I'm really impressed that they did that well on it.
When you talk about how versatile this band can become, especially after the first album, I mean, I do like speed metal a lot, and I'm probably going to shine on that all day. But their technical ability, their ability to play, their ability to branch out and hit different things, like the song "Sunlit Nights," for instance. There's a good love song. I mean, it's funny just how broad they became, how able they were able to branch out and still maintain that technical guitar playing and drumming.
I think that technical brilliance is why this band had staying power, even though they weren't commercially successful. Like music nerds like us are just like, holy shit, who are these guys? Because these guys kind of, when it comes to like bands coming out of the LA scene, like everybody talks about Motley Crue or Rat or Alcatraz or whoever. And those guys are great. Hell, I mean, Yngwie Malmsteen was in 2 of them. Or Dokken with George Lynch. And Paul Gilbert and Racer X kind of get left to the side because they never really broke through that barrier into worldwide fame. They were really just more of a regional band from the Southwest. And until Scott Travis was in Judas Priest, nobody really knew who they were.
You know what? I would actually ask you a question because I've heard this from a lot of metalheads across, all over for wherever I visited. And a lot of them agree on one thing. It's the smaller bands that like Racer X are the ones you don't hear about that are usually better. Do you agree with that?
I would, in most cases, I would say yes. Sometimes a smaller band blows up later in their career. Sabaton's a perfect example of that, where they were kind of an obscurity for a long, long time. And then I think in the last decade or so, like they've really just like people started finding out about them outside of Sweden, and then everyone's like, "Holy shit, these guys are amazing!"
They are amazing. I love their music,
and especially in North America, where metal kind of is a very underground genre, and like you won't hear it on the radio anymore.
No,
which is unfortunate. Finding a good local rock station is like finding a gem at this point.
Yeah,
but I think bands like that, when they broke through or started doing North American tours, everybody who heard them is just like, where have these guys been hiding? And unfortunately, I don't think Racer X really got in their initial run here from 84 to 89, really got that exposure outside of the LA scene.
Yeah.
Like they never got picked up by a major band and went on tour with them, because that's how a lot of bands got their start, is they had one really good album and their label managed to hook them up with a great tour.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of that seems to be who you know, and good fortune, and
yeah, and unfortunately, these guys were on the getting shafted end of the 80s of the labels in the 80s, which happened to a lot of really good bands.
If they were to do it based on merit, these guys should have really been up there.
Oh, if this was purely merit based, these guys would be one of the biggest bands on the planet.
You're right.
When it comes to sheer technical ability, and I think most people who heard it that were into metal would just their jaws hit the floor as soon as you hear something like Street Lethal or YRO. They're just like, what?
Let me think. I'm looking at the titles of the songs because, I'm trying to think of the one off of the Street Lethal album that just blew me away completely. I'm not sure if it was Blurring the Radio or On the Loose or Loud and Clear. They're all good. They're all good. The whole album is good.
Yeah, I was gonna say that pretty much from second 1 to the 35th minute is just pure gold.
There's hardly any songs on an album that I'll just go and put the like button on all of them. Like on an album, even with
there are a lot of albums like that for me, but that's because first of all, I listen to a lot of albums, and second of all, I tend to gravitate towards those kind of bands that do like more complete works than, like we said yesterday during the Wall stream, this was a complete unit. It wasn't, a series of songs, which I think is indicative of when it was released in the late 70s, early 80s. Whereas this is already in the CD era where, you could kind of get away with a little bit more of that, and Racer X avoided that.
Yeah.
Which I really, really liked.
I did too, but that entire Street Lethal album, there's not one complaint.
And Second Heat's a damn good record too.
Oh yeah.
I would heavily recommend all of it.
Yeah.
And I don't really think there's a weak song on this album either.
No, not really. I mean, when I say what I like, I mean the speed metal side of it.
Oh yeah, but there's a ton of other stuff, like from trad heavy metal to kind of power ballads on this song, and they do a really good job of it, which is hard to do.
It is.
Everybody was doing that back in the day, and I think that was probably a label requirement. Like, oh, we have to have the power ballad for like radio play and stuff like that.
It practically was. You hear 80s bands back then, they all had them.
Yep, and then it's unfortunately they're the ones with the money. So until you establish a name for yourself and start selling records, they're the ones in the driver's seat when it comes to what you get to do and who you get to do it with.
Yeah.
Was just part of being in the industry back then.
Yeah.
And then in 99, when they reformed, we get this monstrosity of a record.
Another good one.
With with technical difficulties, which can describe this stream at times. But no, I mean, the title track is amazing. You also have, some really, really good musicianship throughout this entire record. This is most of the original lineup back too. I believe Paul Gilbert's the only guitarist on this one, whereas Brian Boulez, I think, is the producer for this record. Rather than playing on the album. Jeff Martin's back behind vocals, which his vocal talent kind of goes underutilized on the 80s stuff. And I think it's on the later albums where you really see what he's capable of.
Yeah, I think you're right. So remember those two songs I talked about? And there's a lot of them on this album too. I mean, this album has a lot of good vocals. Not only that,
and he's got a much better vocal range on this one too, where he used to be like high and higher, and now he has a good low end too.
Yeah.
I think he always did. I think it's just that wasn't popular at the time, so the label was just like, no, go high on this one.
Yeah, they're just utilizing the range more.
Yeah, and I think the instrumentation on this one's a little heavier too. Like they have a little bit better mix on the bottom end, like a little bit more oomph to their tone, which I really, really like. Yeah, because a lot of the 80s stuff can kind of sound a little too polished, where like the low end and the bass just kind of disappears into the mix.
I describe it as too
there,
studio.
But nobody can hear it.
Yeah, the 80s stuff is too studio. Right. Yeah. And before we got on stream and we started talking about Racer X, we were talking about this album and this song of the same name, Technical Difficulties. And you told me about it. I'm listening to Technical Difficulties. I thought, well, I should probably do the same because it's a good song anyway. Just find an excuse to listen to it. And the technical work is excellent. I mean, you can't get any better.
Yeah, this is one of those albums and one of those artists too. Like if you can play a Paul Gilbert piece, you can play pretty much anything.
Yeah.
I should know because I can't. I can't even come close. But oh man, but he is just technically brilliant when it comes to playing guitar. Like he's at the level of, I'm not sure he knows how to teach what he does, but he's apparently an instructor, a music instructor. So apparently he does have at least some of that ability, which puts him in a very rare category, because guys like Yngwie Malmsteen, like, yeah, they're brilliant guitar players, but they could never teach you how to do that.
Well, now I learned the man who I want to teach me guitar.
Yeah, pretty much. That's
yeah.
Please.
Exactly. There's anybody that want to teach me
how to
guitar,
use this,
but
not a monkey.
Absolutely.
But, man, but like I could easily imagine being a teenager in the 80s and hearing this for the first time and immediately trying to go down to the local pawn shop and pick up an electric guitar and try to learn how to play it. Like this is that inspiring kind of thing.
Yeah, this is the sort of music I was looking for back then and couldn't find.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, and there's tons of bands out there like that should have been bigger than they were. They just either never got their shot or always kind of stayed in the underground because either that's the way they wanted it or their label was kind of screwing them. Grim Reaper is an excellent example of that, where they're an outstanding band and they only really got 3 albums. And then they got in a dispute with their label and then tried to go to another record label, only to find out that their label actually owned the name Grim Reaper. So they couldn't even reform.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
So
you heard all sorts of stuff back then. Like that.
Oh man, a shame. The record industry used to be brutal. And to the point where guys used to lash out at them constantly in song, which, is the old adage, never piss off the man with the microphone.
Yeah.
Queen's famous for it with songs like Death on Two Legs and Scandal. Wasp famously has has Chainsaw Charlie.
I'm trying to remember the name of a song by a band I like, Ministry. They got one that too. Gold Diggers. That's it. Gold Diggers.
Yep. Yeah. That one's a classic one too. Yeah. And rock and metal bands are probably the worst ones to piss off because we're not exactly shy
about letting you know. That's right.
Yeah, so you're gonna know what he thinks, and you're probably not gonna like it. But no, fortunately, these guys got a second chance in the late 90s and early 2000s to kind of, and they still never really went anywhere commercially, but it was good that artistically, like they kind of got to develop that sound a little more, especially like, being 10 years more experienced. I mean, at this point, Scott Travis had been Judas Priest drummer for the last 8 years. So he had all that experience working with one of the bands that founded this genre and, touring with top tier artists around the world. So you can tell he kind of developed his style a little bit and brought some of the stuff he'd been working on back into RACER X.
Well, yeah, one of the songs that's an improvement upon their entire catalog and their style in general, in my opinion, and from this very album is Executioner song, I think it's called. Let me see. Is that what it's called? Yeah. That's a new kind of excellent. Is what that is.
Yeah, and it kind of brings that heaviness that I think some of their early material was missing.
Yeah.
And it kind of really brings it to the forefront, and you have a much fuller sound. That might be the mix on this record too, because it's a lot. I noticed the bass line a lot more than I did on their previous albums on this record. And it's hard, especially with speed metal, where it's a lot more wall of noise, very technical stuff. It's hard to make the bass kind of audible in the mix.
Yeah, it hits you with a little bit more oomph. And that I didn't notice that until you mentioned it just now. That's the funny thing about it. But it hits you in your bones, and you don't realize it until someone like you mentions it.
Well, and it's also like the difference between like listening to a really good album and then seeing the band live.
Yeah.
It's like, because like you can hear it on the album all you want, and it's great, and everything's firing on all cylinders, and it's wonderful. And then you go see them live, and that bass drum or that line from the bass guitar just hits you straight in the chest, and you're just like, ooh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, talk about time traveling trips. That's one of the things I want to do. I want to listen to some of this band live.
Oh, that would have been awesome, especially at a tiny venue like the Roxy in like 85, 86.
Yeah.
When they were writing some of this stuff.
Yeah, just have a few shots and listen. That sounds like a great
you'd
time.
probably be drinking with the band after, because like these were basically
perfect.
Bars that were a couple hundred people, maybe 400, 500 max. And they were just absolute bangers.
Yeah.
And like everybody played here. Like if you were in the scene, in the local scene in the 80s, you played at these bars. The Whiskey A Go-Go, the Roxy, all of them. And the bands all knew each other too.
Yeah.
And like that's one cool thing I think about metal in general is like even today I've met the members of bands in the crowd after their set, because like the opening acts, like they're fans too. Like they want to hear the headliner as much as we do.
Yeah. Just like our little fellowship here on YouTube, we go and we check each other out because we're actually fans too. So
yeah, absolutely. And we all talk, and like, you never know who's going to pop on whose stream. Like we've had some pretty big guys on this channel. I've been on other guys who have bigger channels. And it's cool that we all like kind of cross pollinate and get to talk and then support each other. And we all learn from each other too.
Like we were talking before stream about Dead 70s Rock Fan. Shout out to him.
Oh,
another excellent channel. Yeah. Plenty of people.
Regular member of this panel. I'm a regular member on his show.
Yeah, I watch him
he was
too.
One of the first guys I really talked to once I started Rock and Roll Religion on that Saxon record that came out this year, and that's still one of my favorite conversations we've had, because it's an album both of us absolutely adore, and he's just really knowledgeable about this entire genre from its inception to now.
70s is a guy who's knowledgeable about many things, music included.
Yeah, and he's just a genuinely good guy too.
Infectiously good.
Some people, not necessarily in the fellowship, but on YouTube in general, you get the idea that they're playing a character or whatever. Most of the guys in our little corner of the internet, they're nothing like that. Like what you see is what you get.
Yep.
Like, I can't wait to meet some of these guys in person, and I have met some of them in person in Boston and other places. And like those Boston meetups that we used to do, they used to get, but they still do every couple of months. I'm just not up there anymore.
Yeah.
It was really great getting to hang out with guys like, Gilkman, Dr. Rachel, all those guys, Brightest Day, and Scott from Sporting News Podcast, who was actually, I think, the first guy I ever met from the fellowship in real life.
I haven't got to do a meetup yet, but I was trying to meet the last Vegas meetup before I had to take my break. So,
yeah, I was trying to make Orlando happen. Unfortunately, I just couldn't make it happen because that was right before the move. So we were still packing everything up and all that. So I was just like, I can't do it.
Yeah, but one of these days, you and I
There's
will
always
we'll all meet up. Yeah, that's right. We'll keep trying and we'll make it happen like we made this stream happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things. It'll happen eventually.
That's right.
Like, there's so many guys I want to have on the channel that I've talked to about doing it, and I either lose track of it and stop following up, or I just haven't had an episode I think they'd be good for yet, or that they'd want to do. Like, one of them's Culture Casino. Like, I talked to him very early on about doing an episode, and he said we were talking back and forth, and we just couldn't decide on a band. But I'm doing in the writing stages now for a history of rock and roll, 1955 to 1970 stream.
Oh,
that I think he'd absolutely love, and I'll have to shoot him a message about it.
I like some of that era too, especially the late '60s era. I like that.
The late '60s era was basically like, the beginnings of heavy metal, like coming out of what was rock and roll. I actually love some of the original stuff too, like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's really, really cool. Yeah, because it's really authentic. Because there's no one that they're copying. They just kind of pulled this stuff out of the ether and just ran with it.
Yeah. And it was a very creative time. Very fun.
Yeah,
very fun.
And it's just fun music too. Like, whether it be Johnny B. Good or Good Golly Miss Molly or whatever. It's just like, how can you not enjoy that?
And not just rock either. Stuff like funk. You had James Brown coming out with stuff and doing like a 12-minute jam session just off the fly. Let's just do this.
Yep.
And he did it.
Yeah, like that was the thing. Like, yeah, James Brown was popular, but that's because his stuff was good.
Yeah.
Like 70, like especially some of the funk stuff that came out in the 70s was really awesome. What they were doing with bass and stuff like that was killer. Yeah. And I think had an influence on pop music too. Because if you notice, like early Michael Jackson had a lot of funk influence on his sound, especially on like Off the Wall.
Oh yeah. And that kind of takes me back to technical difficulties actually, because now that we mention it, there is a little tiny bit of hint of funk in there. So
yeah, and some of the bass work, I can see that. Yep.
Yeah. Tiny bit of hint of funk. So it's funny you mention that.
And also just like kind of the attitude of like kind of jamming a little bit more progressive sound that kind of comes out on this record a lot more is that they're willing to experiment with a little bit different sounds, different tones, different tempos and stuff like that. And they really make it work. Yeah. So I think this is probably the most progressive they got in terms of their sound. And while not compromising on, some of the speed stuff, like technical difficulties itself is just an absolute burner.
Yeah, it's not only is it a burner, but it's a riff that goes on a while, and it's not one you get tired of at all. Some riffs, if they go on a while, it's like, okay, I get it. You get a pattern or something. Not with this one.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Is like they know. First of all, they know how to write a killer riff, which is hard enough by itself, and they know when to end it and when to transition into something else. And that's something that's very hard to do because, especially on longer songs, especially with some bands that probably should have a better producer or a producer that's willing to stand up to them. Looking at you, Kevin Shirley, because the last Maiden records, you guys don't know when to end a song.
You know what? That is why I don't like them. I finally figured it out. People have said, why don't you like them? There you go.
Early Iron Maiden, fucking fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you notice, a lot of the better songs of theirs are like 2-3 minutes.
I forget what the name of the song is, but it's Hangar something. Hangar 68, Hangar something. I like
Oh,
that
Hangar
song a lot.
18 by Megadeth.
That's I'm getting them mixed up. Sorry, Iron Maiden. Let me think. Something in the Hills.
Run to the Hills.
That's it. That's the one I like.
That one's absolutely brilliant. That whole album kicks ass. And my favorite's actually a much more speed metal anthem, Aces High off of Power Slave.
I haven't heard that in forever. I gotta listen to that again.
But like early Iron Maiden is fantastic, but that's because they knew when to end their song. And they had a producer who would stand up to them and go, "No, you can't do a 15-minute song with 3 lead breaks in it. Or if you do it once, like Rime of the Ancient Mariner on Power Slave, and that's it. That's the one you get."
And I was telling people, I was like, you know what? This is making me want to fall asleep for some reason. I can't tell you why. And you named it.
They used to do longer songs, but they would be very varied. There was always something musically very interesting going on, and like it was leading to something and building the whole way. Yeah. Now it's just like they have like every song, and they did it once on a record with like Rime of the Ancient Mariner or Alexander the Great. Now it's every song on the fucking record, and it's like 2-minute acoustic intro followed by kind of plotting riff, followed by lead break number 1 and 2 and 7, and it never really builds to anything. It always just kind of comes back to that same riff that nobody cared about the first time.
Yeah, and that's why I'm glad you introduced me to RACER X, because I need that energy. They got that energy, man. They got it,
and they kept it up for a lot of years. And I was amazed at the quality of this record, having guys that were, I think Paul Gilbert was 19 when Street Lethal came out.
That makes sense.
Which, first of all, having a 19-year-old play like that is insane.
Well, he's a genius anyway.
It also makes me very humble about my own musical skills. But, and then they only really had those 2 records, and they weren't together very long. And then they all went off and did their own thing. And then a decade later, they can come back and produce something this high quality on their first attempt, really.
Yeah.
Like that shows the level of talent and skill that these guys show all the time, pretty much.
Well, that's why I'm saying Paul Gilbert, in my opinion, is kind of like a guitar genius. And I hardly ever use hyperbolic talk like that, but to me, he really is. The technical ability of that man, I can't understate it.
He is, and it's clearly not even just being a brilliant guitar player. It's being a good musical composer and knowing how to write music like this, because the whole thing, it's not just his parts that are outstanding. Because you see a ton of bands like that in the 80s where they have a killer guitarist, but the rest of the band is just kind of
You're right.
Docking, looking at you. But you have the whole package here where you have a really good bass player, at least technical bass player. He doesn't really do anything flashy overly much, but he's a solid bass player, and you never really hear any mistakes from him. Scott Travis is an absolutely kick-ass drummer, one of the better ones in the genre. And then you have, Paul Gilbert and Jeff Martin doing the front end of it. And I think with that writing team, you have a really, really solid core of guys.
It shows in the music. They had to have good writing, otherwise they couldn't have pulled off what they did.
And they bring it right back to where they were kind of at in 1987, and just brought it forward 12 years and evolved it in a way that makes sense naturally for that band too.
Yeah,
especially given the new technologies, new sounds, new experiences that those guys had, but bringing it all back together and making it their own, rather than just kind of like, oh, well, this is popular now, we'll do that.
I totally agree, because Technical Difficulties is kind of an ironic name. It should have been called Technical Progression or something, because they take.
There really is no difficulty they really had no difficulty getting back into it.
Not only that, but building and creating something new. Yeah, it's evolution.
It's just a natural evolution of what their sound would sound like if they had been doing this the entire time.
Yeah.
And hey, Soul Assassin, good to see you. And dude, this band is new to a lot of people because, they are kind of a deeper cut. Like these guys never really hit any kind of mainstream success. And that's unfortunate. But that's one of the reasons we do this show, is to shine a spotlight on bands like this, because they deserve attention. And I think these guys could spawn an entire new brainwave in a lot of musicians' minds, and spark new interest in a lot of fans. Because there was enough metal coming out in the 80s that you could spend the next 30, 40 years trying to document all of it and trying to listen to all of it. And these guys kind of got lost in the noise back then, but they really did bring it together. And the funny part is the only reason anybody ever heard of Racer X is, unfortunately, after Scott Travis left the band, he became Judas Priest drummer. So everybody heard about that in their own thing. So it was really one of those moments where I think this second era was kind of introducing an entirely new element into the band of stuff that they had learned previously, with either Paul Gilbert's solo stuff or, like I said before, Scott Travis's adventures with Judas Priest. And they really did kind of just take that extra 12 years of experience and kind of just put it back into the same formula and ended up with a really solid product out of it.
Yeah.
I would go so far as to say their best work, musically anyway.
Yeah, musically, definitely. I'm a thrash metal addict. I mean, I love my speed metal. I love all that. But when you take a look objectively and you see the technical ability of these different songs, these pieces, I mean, they're composed pretty much.
Yeah, like this is actual classical composition. Like these are musical pieces. These aren't just, guys with guitars just trying to be as fast, as aggressive as possible.
No.
Which I like that stuff too. I mean, let's face it, I listen to black metal.
Yeah. But I mean, you compare something like
on another level. When you can combine this heaviness with this kind of technical ability and make it work seamlessly, like that's peak performance.
I'm gonna probably have a whole bunch of Pantera fans pissed off at me now, but in comparison to something like Racer X, both good speed metal, both really heavy, but Gilbert and the rest just got the technical ability in comparison, in my opinion. They're better at it.
I will say that early Pantera, like their first 3 records, they're absolutely brilliant. They're almost like they're very similar sounding to this in some cases.
Yeah.
And then they kind of went with the musical zeitgeist of the time with Cowboys from Hell and then went down that track.
Yeah.
Which I don't blame them for doing that. That way lies success and stardom and all that. Totally understand.
And then some of that stuff was pretty fun too.
That was the way that Dime wanted to go anyway.
Yeah. I think he did. And not only that, some of it was pretty fun. Sharpening my pitchfork. All right, Soul Assassin. But
direct all your hate mail down there.
And just send it to my email. Anyway, they are a great band. They're fun. They're a lot of fun, Pantera. And it wasn't a bag on them. It was just to say that in comparison to technical ability. Now you take something like the general appeal and things like that, marketing, Pantera was better. So we all have our strengths.
But even like against guys on their technical level, I would put this album up against 90s Yngwie.
Yeah.
Stuff on like Fire and Ice or Odyssey or Fault Line. Like this is easily that good.
I need to really listen to more
everyone accuses Paul Gilbert of kind of ripping off Yngwie Malmsteen.
Yeah.
It's like, I'd say they're neck and neck.
I need to listen to more. I've only listened a little bit, unfortunately, and I need you've been showing me so much good music actually on not only this channel, you and 70s and several other people have really been showing me a lot of what I missed, and I appreciate that.
This is why I love doing this show and why I like showing off bands like this is bands that people just drove right by. They're that really kick-ass little diner on the side of the highway that everyone just drove right past, but I just happened to stop at and had a really good experience with. And those are the ones that are really kind of like hidden gems. Like the locals know about it, but nobody else does.
And this seems like that because I would swear I would have heard at least a few of these songs on the radio, and they sound familiar. And I was like, who did this? Because on the radio, of course, they never tell you who
Oh,
does what.
absolutely. Or
Especially
like
the
they'd
80s.
say it they'd say it in like a list of like the last 6 songs they played, and you have to figure out which one it was.
Yeah.
Stand for me for 1 second. I'll be right back.
Okay. But yeah, this not only just technical difficulties, but Street Lethal, Second Heat. I mean, I'll list off a number of songs you guys need to listen to, right? In my opinion, especially the speed stuff. So I see you, Soul Assassin, you like speed, right? So first of all, you got to start off with Street Lethal. Got to do it. Blown Up the Radio, Harder Than Fire, On the Loose, Loud and Clear, and you got to rock it at the end. Got to rock it at the end. That's the first album. So let's see what else I got. I got a playlist here for you. So yeah, there's them. And then I only made it up to for the playlist to the second album, Second Heat, Sacrifice and Scarified. You like it hard, you like it fast, that's what you need to do.
Well, I mean, for now, Soul, it's not that it's not that hard because there's only like 10 of you.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. 10 years from now, when I've actually like, got a huge audience, I'll still know who you guys are.
Yeah. No, yeah.
I mean, this band, I really, really think that this is technically probably one of their best records. And, I think a lot that might have caused a little bit of trepidation in some people because, this band's getting a lot more progressive, a lot more experimental. We've seen how that goes in a number of other bands, especially big bands like Metallica, where they had a little bit different record and then they went off down the rabbit hole into the mainstream and we never saw that potential again. And so they're like, okay, well, this is kind of a slower, more progressive record in some cases or on some tracks. And everyone's like, okay, well, can they still do speed metal? Well, we got the answer to that in 2000 with this being Superheroes.
That was a great one too.
And right from the first track too.
Superheroes is a good song.
Which, like, if you ever thought that they were trying to get away from speed metal, this one is the one that disabused you of that notion right off the bat.
Oh yeah, it did. Not only that, but there is the third song on the album. Why isn't that the theme song to that movie?
Because this came out in 2000. I think Godzilla was 98.
Well, then they did another Godzilla. Why not that one? I want that song.
The 2015 one, like, either use the original Blue Oyster Cult version or use this one because they're both fantastic. But like, why? Why is it not even in the movie?
No, it has to be there one day. RACER X deserves that. You need to put that in a Godzilla movie, seriously.
Right? Or at least the Blue Oyster Cult version. Like, come on. Like, it's a cult classic. Put it in the movie.
Yeah. Or maybe you could do both. Begin the one with the Blue Oyster Cult and then end it with RACER X, right?
Or just put different bits of both of them in there and have them figure it out. Although we are in the era of really strange album art from metal bands. Like, early computer graphics were around, so that everybody was playing around with it and just creating some really weird shit.
Yeah. Like I like how he has I like this album cover actually.
It's an interesting one. It's not something I would have like gravitated to in like high school, but like considering when it came out, like this is not by far not the worst I've seen.
No.
After all, I just did a stream a couple of months ago on, the 90s and early 2000s Iron Maiden. Yeah, Virtual 11 still exists and I still remember what it looks like. No, thank you.
This to me looks like bubble wrap gone wrong.
Yeah, or literally just guys being freaking stupid and just doing something weird because they can.
Exactly. It's fun like that,
Yeah, and like I like that aspect of these guys too, and they're a band that doesn't take themselves too seriously.
Yeah.
Despite having serious musical talent and really being top tier, like you can tell they know how to have fun too.
Well, yeah, I imagine, I don't know anything about these guys really. I didn't do too much research except to listen to the music. But to me, just the fun they have, just the fun they bring on with their music. I don't think these guys probably would be that arrogant or anything like that. They just know their craft. They love their craft, and they bring that through with their music. That's kind of how I see they would probably be.
Yep. And Fizz, I mean, it looks like a bass player getting molested by a fire hydrant in real time, but you know.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with the safety rap thing. Yeah.
But that's one of those, like, it's at least unique. Like, no one's ever gonna mistake this album for anything else.
It's unique and fun. I like the fun of it.
It is. And like, I think that's perfect for this kind of record too, in that it's a less serious take and a little bit more just have fun, a little faster, a little more metallic. I mean, let's face it, this is the one they put Godzilla on. So like,
yeah.
And there's some other great ones on this album too, like Viking Kong. Which, like, the riffs on that are just fantastic. And like listening to the albums, like, you know, doing the research for this episode, I was just like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. That's brilliant. I forgot about this one too. Like, half the stuff you run into is just like stuff I'd heard before and I just never really either paid attention to or I forgot existed, because it's been a while since I've really listened to these guys religiously. And then, like, you know, it kind of hits you again. You're like, oh yeah, that was a great one too.
Yeah, and
especially for 2001, this is extremely high level and way better than most of the stuff that was coming out at that time.
Yeah, and there are 4 songs that I just think everybody should definitely listen to off of this record. These are my 4 favorites, if you don't mind me telling them.
Absolutely, go for it.
And if you gotta listen to Superheroes. Of course, you got to start off with that one. Let the Spirit Fly, Godzilla, because it's the best theme song for that ever, in my opinion.
Yep.
And then Viking Kong, just like you said.
Yep. I mean, that's a pretty good list. I would say just listen, as I always say on the show, just listen to the whole damn record, because there's some stuff that will surprise you. Even stuff like, you know, you look through the, you know, song titles, and with metal, you can never really tell what the bangers are going to be just by looking at the titles.
That's right.
Like, and they'll throw curveballs at you in here. And you know what? That's one of the great parts about listening to this genre and all these bands, is just seeing what kind of stuff they throw at you.
Well, yeah. One good thing about listening to the whole album is that you can understand how they evolved to make the music what it is if you listen to it long enough, I think.
Yeah, and also you get a feel for, you know, the material being presented in the way the band wanted to show it to you.
Yeah, it's kind of like telling a story almost, and you don't want to cut out too many pieces, otherwise you might not understand the story too well.
No, Soul Assassin, we're saying they should have been on the
yeah, they should have
movie. This unfortunately came out in 2000, and Technical Difficulties came out in 99. So these songs were just after that.
Yeah.
But they do, if you've ever heard the original Godzilla by Blue Oyster Cult, this is a metal cover of it, and done very well.
Yeah.
And very true to the original too, just really heavy.
Yeah.
And it takes a very skilled artist to do a Blue Oyster Cult cover right, because they're a kind of an interesting band.
Yeah.
And that they were another one that was kind of like in the quasi metal category, almost like Deep Purple, where some of it's really metallic, some of it's not.
Yeah.
But all of it's really, really solid. And these guys, there's no mistaking their genre. These guys are straight up balls to the wall speed metal all day, every day, with occasional forays into either trad heavy or progressive metal.
Yeah, and even some, I would say, not like a little bit of classic metal even too in certain songs.
Well, that's what I mean with trad heavy metal, is like the traditional, like, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, like that kind of sound.
Yeah,
which makes perfect sense for when this came out, because like those are the bands these guys would have grown up listening to.
Yeah,
like, you know, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, probably Iron Maiden, you know, definitely Deep Purple and Saxon.
Yeah,
like those bands were all over the place when these guys were forming.
there's even a few touches of Saxon. That's the band I was looking for, especially for things like songs like Sunlit Nights. I can
Yep.
think there's a little bit of Saxon
I can hear
influence.
early Saxon in there.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you can say that for over 100 bands probably, because Saxon was one of the big boys. Like there was the No Sleep Till Hammersmith tour for Motorhead in 1979, and Saxon actually opened for Motorhead. I cannot imagine what it was like going to see that tour. I imagine for the next couple of days you couldn't hear much and your neck hurt a lot, but
well, as far as musical trips through time, I mean, you got to do the 60s and the 70s, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, I would go for like late 70s, early 80s too.
Yeah, me too.
Like that's what, like the new wave of British heavy metal was coming in. You had the beginnings of black and thrash metal starting in '81 with Venom and Bathory and all that. So like you have that was the cool part with the kind of the evolution of metal from like 1970 to pretty much 1989. You had like 16 different subgenres of metal that all kind of spun out on their own little trajectories because people were just taking that new toy and running with it.
And only that, but other stuff branched off from metal. Some people would argue this all day, but you might have had punk, you might have had all sorts of other stuff sprung up from it at the time because music was just branching out all over the place at that time. So creative. And yeah, I mean, there was so much.
I wouldn't say punk is necessarily a spin-off of metal, but kind of a reaction to it.
That's a better way of putting it.
And certainly kind of a parallel development, whereas like metal kind of came out of that like really heavy blues, like kind of anti-war era in the late 60s with like Jimi Hendrix and Deep Purple and all that. You can kind of hear where Black Sabbath came from out of that, and then Priest kind of evolved from there. And punk just kind of came screaming out of the ether in 1976 with the Ramones.
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, the Sex Pistols. Of just, basically, as I think it was Johnny Ramone said in an interview, just like, we're just 4 fuck-ups from Jersey that like playing rock and roll.
I just recently got a cat that might be turning on my TV. How did you learn how to do that? Cats are crazy.
I was going to say, we don't ask how cats do things in their magic creatures.
Yeah, I sent you a private chat about going down and turn off. I turned it off, and here it is back on.
He's like, no, I was watching that.
Apparently so. Well, we'll just leave it go.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
When you have a cat, you just realize you're just not the one in charge anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I mean, and that's the cool part with pretty much the entire history of metal. It's never been a static genre where like, this is how it's played. This is what you do in it. Like, it's always been willing to try new things and go new places, whether it be lyrical content, whether it be new production techniques, new instruments, new technology. Like, they've been pushing the boundary of it ever since.
Yeah.
Whether it be like, black and death metal pushing the extremes of how hard and heavy you can go, both vocally and musically, or speed metal just pushing it up to the freaking sound barrier with the tempos and stuff like that, or just trad heavy metal, just kind of staying in the main vein, but still evolving the sound and keep doing new and interesting things. And then one of my favorites, you have power metal, which kind of combines speed metal with fantasy.
Good way of putting it.
It's very much the sword and sorcery style or side of the house. We have bands like Dio, Blind Guardian, Gamma Ray, who we'll probably get to at some point.
You consider something like Dragon Force in that genre?
Dragon Force is power metal. I wouldn't put them right up at the top of there. They have one really good record.
Okay. I would say at the top. I'm just saying, would you consider them in that genre?
Oh, yeah, they're absolutely power metal.
Yeah.
More on the speed side of the house.
Okay.
Although they do have a lot of the fantasy elements and more stuff like that. And it's actually a genre I kind of want to go down the rabbit hole a little bit on my own is I had an idea for basically a sci-fi themed power metal band.
Maybe I could see that with something like Warhammer 40K. I mean, you got
that exists with bands like Bolt Thrower.
Really? I didn't know that
Yeah,
existed.
there is a death metal band from the late 80s and early 90s where a lot of their lyrics are actually based on 40K,
All right. There's another one I got to check out.
with songs like War Master.
Well, there's a clue.
Yeah, right. Or World Eater.
Well, another clue.
Yep. But they're more on the brutal side of like death metal, but I really enjoy it mainly partially because of the in jokes of like, I know where that.
I see Soul Assassins jamming the superhero.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You can hear some Rust in Peace in there with some of the guitar solos and stuff like that. Paul Gilbert was definitely channeling Marty Friedman, which if you're going to emulate a band, might as well do the best. And yeah, Soul Assassin, me and Zeno were talking about that before the show. God damn, that is great news, and that made me really, really happy.
Yeah,
when I heard that, like there was squealing a little bit.
Yeah, we were both squealing a little bit, and we were speculating maybe Primarch, maybe Emperor, maybe we don't know, but we hope any of them.
The one I keep hearing getting thrown around that I would be in favor for is Constantine Valdor.
Yeah, there's one. Yeah,
because the Custodians are one of those things you don't really see all that much in the lore. Like they're just even when they're there, they're kind of in the background. Yeah, and yet they're a very interesting faction. But and criminally underrated in the current lore, I think, because for the last 10,000 years they've just kind of been sitting on Terra doing nothing.
Yeah, and I don't think it doesn't make much sense to me. But unreliable narrator, which is another good part of that.
Or well, they've either been sitting there doing nothing, or a lot of their stuff is so secret and clouded in mystery that even the Inquisition doesn't know what they're doing.
That's why I think it is actually. I don't see them sitting around.
The Emperor's personal guard, that would actually be about where I'd put that. But no, I mean that. But that's like I want to do like a little more like less 40K and more like aspirational, more like a Star Trek type of future, type of like message.
Oh, okay.
Because that's one thing I think on this album. It's a little more upbeat and very kind of inspiring musically.
You're right. It is.
And I think that's awesome.
Well, you mentioned Star Trek and how the message and how upbeat it is.
It's very easy, especially in this period of music, to get really brutal and really depressive and stuff like that, because that was kind of the zeitgeist of the era, because it's the late 90s and early 2000s. But instead, they went the other way with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's very telling of their ability, and also their intent is to go against the grain in some ways.
Yeah, and they do it successfully too, and it evolves their music at the same time, which is the best part of it. So yeah,
and I love that attitude that they've always seemed to have of like, we're not doing what other bands do. We're Racer X. We do things our way.
Well,
and if you like it, that's great, and if not, oh well.
That's a mark of a great band, and I think you see that with some other bands as well. The more successful ones, honestly, at least musically, maybe not marketing, maybe not studio wise, but as far as how they play.
But when it comes to authenticity and like creativity, like you can really see that. Like one of the best examples I have in more modern times is Ghost.
Yeah.
They don't sound like anybody else. They're not the heaviest band out there, but they're really unique.
Yeah.
And they're the exact band that they want to be.
Yeah. It's like, I'm trying to think of a metal band in that vein, but I actually listen. I think a lot of us metalheads actually listen to branch out and are very eclectic in our taste. And that reminded me of something I was listening to in reggae, ironically, that reminded me of that same vein you're talking about of branching out creatively. Actual guy here on YouTube, so that's kind of funny you mentioned that.
Yeah, but no, like I see a lot of these comments of like, taking a break from the stream and listening to Racer X's music. And that's what I love to hear, is that we're doing a good enough job of talking about them that people actually want to go hear it.
Yeah.
And I hope you guys like him as much as we do. Cause like, this is one of those bands, like when I discovered him, I was like, wow, okay. I thought I knew the genre, and these guys are like really changing my opinion on a lot of stuff. They're really drawing me into their material.
Can't agree more, because when I was here probably how long ago? It doesn't matter how long ago it was. Last time I was here and I was listening to you guys and you were talking about Saxon, I was pleasantly surprised, and you were talking about the different songs, and while you were doing that, I was going on Spotify, I was going on different places and listening. And yeah, it's encouraged here. Do it. You're gonna love it.
Yeah, and like, and Saxon's another one of those bands. Like we went down the rabbit hole on with 70s and Nick way back in the day. If you haven't seen that episode, it's still one of my favorites that we've ever done. You will not find two more knowledgeable guys on not only Saxon but metal in general, and two guys who genuinely care about this shit more than the two of them. And it was just really fun to talk to both of them about it. And that album we were talking about is going to get brought up at the end of the year, because we are going to be doing a stream on like our top albums of 2022.
I gotta be there.
And that one's going to be in there. There's a couple other ones that I know are going to be in there that are just fantastic records. And I'm really glad that this style of music, being like trad heavy and speed metal, is actually kind of making a resurgence in what we call the NWO THM movement, with bands like Ambush, Wolf, Enforcer. Like they're kind of bringing back that mid to late 80s sound, and these guys are in their 20s.
Now, does NWOTM stand for New World Order Thrash Metal?
No, this is new wave of traditional heavy metal.
Oh, okay.
Because at the beginning of the genre, you had the NWO BHM movement, the new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah.
With bands like Saxon, Iron Maiden, all those guys. Motorhead to an extent.
Now, I remember there was a couple of metal guys who were doing songs and referring to stuff NWOTHM. I always got the acronym mixed up, so thanks for getting that.
Yeah, NWOTHM is actually probably fast becoming one of my favorite little corners of the genre. Is that there's a lot of really, really interesting stuff going on in that genre by very, very young guys.
Encouraging.
And we've done it at one NWOTHM show where we're talking about some of our favorites. Guys, if you're into like these guys, I would recommend bands like Ambush or Riot City. I mean, Riot City is a great example where their first album is 2019. Like these guys are brand new. They just came out with a new record this year called, I think, Electric Elite. It's pretty solid release. And especially there's some Racer X vibes going on with them. They're very they're very Judas Priest sounding, very extremely fast. Pretty good guitar work. Like I wouldn't say like top. I don't want to insult them. Like their guitar work's pretty fucking spectacular. Their singer's an absolute banshee. In fact, maybe I'll share some links with you after the show.
Please do.
Damn, they're good. And the album cover for their first record could not be trying any harder to be Screaming for Vengeance without being a straight ripoff. And it's like the most 80s thing ever. It's fucking glorious. But and these guys have probably had a hand in making a lot of that. Because these are guys who were in the scene already, and especially in the more technical side of things, Paul Gilbert gets brought up a lot by people who know.
Good, you should. But you were talking about bringing kind of the hope of Star Trek into the heavy metal music era.
And back into science fiction too, in a lot of ways, because I think a lot of it's gotten a little too grim dark and a little too gritty and realistic. And I want that like aspirational Star Trek: The Next Generation style media back, because that was really cool as a kid. Like I was actually like a very young child when TNG was on in first run. I remember watching it with my dad, and that just turned me into a Trekkie from minute one. And I think even Star Trek, or New Trek, we'll put it that way, has kind of lost a little of that.
Yeah.
Like, especially with shows like Picard, it's clear that that was written by people who have no idea what Star Trek is or is meant to be.
I've watched pretty much everything except the animated series, and
The
I
animated
watched.
series is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I want to get to that. I just never had an opportunity. But I watched season 1 of Discovery, and I'm like, no, Star Trek is dead to me now. Unfortunately, after that.
I gave that show 3 episodes, and I'm just like, oh my god, because like even TNG or DS9, like the first few episodes, I don't think they really. I don't really knew what they were into, like what they were getting into, or they hadn't really gelled yet, like with the writing. So the first couple episodes were pretty janky in some cases, but give them a minute, they'll get there. And then Discovery, I gave it like 3 episodes, and then I just remember sitting there like watching. I think it's episode 3. I'm just like, oh my god, this isn't going to get any better, is it?
Like I kept hoping. Oh, hey, Sherry. But
hey, Sherry, good to see you as always. And yeah, I want to bring back the old arguments we used to get in between like Trek nerds and Star Wars fans, because most of us like both, but we have a favorite.
Oh yeah, and the arguments were out of love. They weren't out of like like today. Absolutely. Adversarial. People,
but they would get, but that honestly, those arguments get even more brutal because like we both are really passionate, so like it just gets more, it builds.
You get vocal, but these some not our group. Our group is fantastic that way, but you step outside our groups and see how some other people are doing things, and some people get very adversarial and very emotional about the shows they're invested in, to the point of silliness. It's just silliness.
Yeah, and like I think that was part of the strength of both franchises, is that they were so strong that you didn't have to get upset about it, because it's just like, whatever, man. Like, I know what's good.
Exactly. Not only that, but both sides respected that you loved that thing as much as you loved your thing.
And one thing I think, and this is kind of caused, I think, a lot of the problems that we're having in both communities right now, where we let the people in who were in there with the wrong intentions. Like, instead of they loved the thing except for this one part of it, and they want to change that. It's like, no, that's me. No. It's like, well, that's fine that you don't like that thing, but that means you don't like the thing.
Yeah. If it's if it's story, if the story is based on it, if the story can't survive without that thing, then you can't take away that thing. Otherwise, you don't have the story. It would be
like saying you're into 40K, but you're not really into the Gothic aesthetic. Like,
or you don't believe the Emperor of Mankind should be in charge of the Empire. No, neither one will work.
Or you're not into like the Gothic art style. It's like, well, then 40K is not your thing, man, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like we don't get offended when people aren't into the same things we are. We know that we're fucking nerds. That we're the unusual ones here. Oh yeah, Soul Assassin just found Scarified.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a brilliant little instrumental. And
I got to make
these albums are riddled with those little instrumental pieces by Paul Gilbert, and I think not having the lyrics on it. This is not to take away from Jeff Martin's vocals, but the music is strong enough that you don't have to have a vocal track on any of these, and it would still be excellent.
Yeah, just the guitar work alone. But I on this album too, I also like the vocals a bit more.
Yeah, I think too, the production techniques had gotten a little better, so you could hear the bottom end a little better. And also, I think Jeff Martin had developed the lower end of his voice a little more by this point in their career, because he'd been doing side projects with other bands this whole time as well. So you really had that more full sound that I think was missing in the 80s. And that's not to take away from the first 2 records. They're great, but I think this is just better produced.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the song Godzilla again, ironically. In the vein of his voice, actually. He takes that and he just shrieks at certain points, right?
Oh, yeah. and that's like those banshee shrieks. First of all, are indicative of metal as a genre because let's face it, Rob Halford made that shit cool in the 70s.
Yeah,
Um,
but just
and
the way
the ability to be at a very kind of like mid to low range and then just go right up.
Oh yeah,
Just cold is absolutely insane.
yeah.
Like normally you have to kind of build up to that point, but these guys can just unleash it pretty much at any point and then right back down. See you later, Fizz. I'll probably talk to you at some point tonight. But no, these guys are an indicative of everything that metal does right.
Yeah.
And also not being too concerned with who cares. Like, because if you are interested in, money and fame and all that, you don't play this kind of stuff.
No.
These guys are music nerds doing music nerd things.
Pretty much. And that's why there's such good technical ability here. They love to play and they love to learn to play.
And that's why they hang out with guys like Rob Halford and all these guys, even before they were some of their members were part of those bands. Like these guys were in that part of the circle because game recognized game.
Yeah.
Like these guys were known as talent throughout the industry even before they were a band. Like everyone kind of knew, like, okay, these guys, watch out for these guys. These dudes know how to play.
And there were a few songs.
I think that maybe why they didn't succeed as well, because other bands kind of were afraid to have them open for them. Because
that's a good point.
It always looks bad when you get blown off the stage by your opening act. Even if you did a perfectly great set, they're just fantastic.
Yeah, that would become demoralizing and bad for marketing as well. But I was trying to think of a few songs that I heard earlier today when I was listening to Racer X before, where the drumming was good too. And I just can't remember the names of them right now, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, pretty much all of it.
Well, yeah, all of it. But if you stand out more than the others.
I would put Superheroes up with there because you just have that fast double bass that Scott Travis is famous for.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good example.
And that's been a staple of the band pretty much from minute one. It's just that fast double bass drum work that just really the fact that he can do that on this kind of tempo for this kind of time means the man has some serious endurance behind the kit too. Because especially a lot of power metal bands and stuff like that, they'll have that kind of tempo and play 6-7 minute songs. And you can almost see the drummer behind the kit after that one track, just
yeah.
Is it over? No, that was just the first song. We got 6 more to go.
That reminds me, I watched a jazz drummer play once live, and that guy must have been drumming for one song for 15 minutes, right? And just nonstop, right? And that is the sort of endurance these guys seem to have to me in the way they play.
In fact, knowing these guys and knowing that kind of style, there's probably a newer band that you would absolutely love in the power metal genre called Unleash the Archers.
Good name. I like the name already.
Brilliant power metal band out of Canada. I think they're on their 4th or 5th album now. They're really, really solid.
All right. Unleash the Archers.
And, their singer is a female lead, and she is an absolute scream machine.
I like
the weird part. Usually, female vocalists have a very good high range, and then they don't really sing in the middle. She actually has a fairly developed low end too.
Oh,
so she has she has power in the low end too, which is unusual for a female singer.
Almost like some gospel singers, some women gospel singers.
Yeah, or country western singers too, where they can actually project in that mid range.
That mid to low, yeah. That's interesting.
Which
taking that
the
in the
cool
middle.
part is Jeff Martin is actually a lot vocally like Jeff Tate from Queensryche, where naturally he's a baritone.
Yeah,
you can hear that in how his low end comes out. He's naturally a baritone, but he can go right up into the stratosphere with the best of them. And he has power up there too.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the other streams that I was listening to you with. I think maybe 70 was on there, and it was the two of you. You guys were talking about the days of the metal operas, and opera and metal seem to go very well that way, because when you take the vocals and you're able to go and take them low and bring them all the way up,
Yeah,
opera does that a lot.
Well, I mean, a lot of metal genres are very operatic in how they are assembled, and that it's a very classical piece with very with that operatic vocal and that epic sound to it that is really indicative of that style of music, just done with electric instruments rather than a full orchestra.
Yeah.
And yeah, Lacuna Coil is another one that's really, really good. Ginger, I never really got into. I'm not a fan of that vocal style, but I see how talented she is. Serena is really good. Unleash the Archers, like I said. Infected Rain, yeah, those are all really great female singers. I would also put Burning Witches up there. We're a little less power metal, a little less operatic, a more straight ahead heavy metal. I mean, one of their nicknames in the industry is Judas Priestess.
Mm.
And it's well deserved. Like, they actually really kick ass. And, like I said, Judas Priest is my favorite band. So they're doing something right if they're emulating them. And then we get into this last album, which I'm not going to diss on it too much. It's still a fantastic record. But the mid-2000s sound was starting to come in on getting heavier.
In my case, I kind of liked it a little bit more than Snowball of Doom when they did the live track.
Yep.
I actually kind of liked it more than that. I like this album.
Well, the live versions, I think, are better than the studio. I think the production on this one was a little iffy.
Maybe.
But also, on the first half of the record, like Dr. X and stuff like that, some of Jeff Martin's vocals, I think, are getting a little too staccato and a little too gruff, which
they're stiff.
It still fits, but I think it.
No, I'm saying they're stiff.
A little bit like Wayne's.
His vocal is stiff a little bit, I think, on some of it.
Yeah, it's stiff and abrupt rather than the flow he usually has. So I think they were kind of going for a little more song, almost like sound, almost like Wayne Static from Static X, who is another band we'll get to, because I actually have that album here still somewhere. I saw it when we moved.
Yeah, you recommended them before, and I forgot about them too, unfortunately. I need to get some links or something so I can start listening to these guys. Everything you've shown me so far is great. So,
and that's why we have the Gilded page, man. Like, I'll throw stuff up. I need to do more work with it. Unfortunately, it only really works on my phone down here, because my phone actually has a better internet connection than my PC currently.
Oh,
but no, they're another band that unfortunately Wayne died after their second album, so they never really moved on from there, and it was his band, so they never really progressed past that. Because I mean, it was kind of like Motorhead post Lemmy. Like, I keep hearing fans like, "Oh yeah, you can get another singer," or whatever. It's like, dude, it's Lemmy's band. You can't do that.
Yeah,
but he was the soul of the band, and once he's gone, that's it.
Yeah,
at least in terms of new material, like, you can and all these other guys have other bands that they're doing now. Like, I think Mickey D's with the Scorpions now. Phil Campbell's got his own band. So, like, they are all off doing their own thing. So if you want to go see those guys, and they'll do Motorhead stuff, because everyone does. But yeah, like we were talking about this before, with Godzilla and stuff. But Soul Assassin brings up a good point where technical difficulties could be a Gundam opening.
Really? Yeah, you're right. It could. Yeah,
from like the Seed era or something like that. Like, I could see that. In fact, there's a couple of Japanese metal bands that have intros for like Gundam Seed. Bleach has a couple one. In fact, they're both by the same band, High and Mighty Color.
I'm not. I haven't actually heard of many of the Japanese metal bands, but some of the Japanese music I've been hearing.
I need to do a show on some of them, because they're fantastic. Razor Fist turned me on to a lot of the 80s stuff, and I knew about some of the late 90s, early 2000s ones. The metal scene in Japan is absolutely off the chain.
Well, yeah, and I keep finding more music of all sorts of genres to listen from Japan lately. Like, here's one that surprised me: rap. They've got decent
Yeah.
rap in Japan right now. I'm like, oh, these
Which it
guys are
sounds
into.
odd, but the way the Japanese as a language works, it does make sense because it all kind of flows together very well.
Yeah,
And like I could easily see that working really well as a genre over there. And metal, it's like the late '80s never ended, and they just
yeah.
kept going with that, which is fucking awesome.
Well, yeah,
And
it didn't end in many senses, even with metal, even with rap, even with they even have a bit of a rock scene from what I'm starting to see.
yeah,
Um,
there's a lot of mainstream rock bands that come out from over there, and that's starting to come back too with a band I like. There's a lot of hard rock bands that are coming back. Like one I just saw recently is Airborne
oh, okay, yeah.
in Boston. They're kind of like a newer AC/DC.
Oh, that sounds great.
They're
I've
just a
been missing
fun
some
rock band,
ACDC.
and they were playing
Yeah,
this tiny little club, like maybe 300 people. Yeah, and so like it's the little rock club vibe. I mean, I was like right up in the front row. Like the lead singer's guitar neck was over my head at one point, and they were super fun band to see live. Like they were really interactive. Just chucking beers out into the crowd, just basically just being a rock band.
yeah, fun
Um,
times.
oh, they were fantastic. I would love to go see them again because they're super high energy too.
Yeah. Soul
It's like
Assassin. DM me those that list there you got when you get a chance, please. Ungilded.
yeah, I mean, I think Soul Assassin's on our Gilded page. If
I think
not,
so.
there's a
Yeah.
link to it in the description of the video. And anybody in chat or who sees this later, you guys are welcome to come hang out with us on there. And we have a good time. We post up, like not only music stuff, but like, whether it be guns or battle tech or 40K or stuff like that. We have sections for all of it. And we just, kind of talk about whatever's on our minds.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit less censorious and douchebag than Discord is. So it's definitely a good alternative if you're looking for somebody who's not really a bigger company like Discord that has big company ideology. And everyone knows what I mean by that.
Yes.
And yet wants to have like a Discord like experience where it's just kind of us hanging out behind the scenes, just kind of chilling out. And obviously, and since I'm not on Twitter, that's actually, if you guys want to get a hold of me for any reason, that's probably the best way to do it is just DM me on Guild and I'll see it. And I'll get to you eventually whenever I whenever I figure it out.
Yeah, same with me. Anybody in chat, if you want to just chat or whatever, just DM me sometime. I'm cool with that if you're on Guild.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have ideas for a show or want to come on the show or whatever, just DM me. We'll make it happen. We've had guys like that have done that on the show before. I'm always open to hang out with pretty much anyone. If you're willing to come on and talk about the things you love, you're freaking welcome to come on here. And yeah, man, this is really true. I've heard bands from just about every continent. Like I've heard Middle Eastern metal bands. I heard one from Nepal recently that was actually pretty kick-ass. India, there's a really cool one coming out called Bloodywood. And it's a very interesting mix of like kind of thrash metal and traditional Indian music. It's really, really cool. And it was
so much good stuff coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, and like the cool part is in the YouTube era, like you're hearing stuff now that you would never have heard 10 years ago because it's just getting wider distribution than it ever would. Like I'm sure you've heard the band The Who.
The
Not
what?
the 70s rock band, the new one.
No, I haven't heard the new one, unfortunately, yet.
It's basically they're a kind of an interesting, like kind of folk metal band from Mongolia.
Interesting.
Like part of it like is like Mongolian throat singing and like traditional Mongolian instruments kind of playing that like kind of dark metal riff. It's really cool.
I've always wanted that actually. I actually like Mongolian throat singing.
Oh yeah,
it's funny you mentioned cool. That. It seems like a perfect fit for metal. It seems like a perfect fit. It really does.
And there's also a bunch of traditional Scandinavian music bands coming out, like High Lung and stuff like that, where it's like more like traditional Norse music.
We need a metal band called Skull.
It probably exists.
As in cheers in Norse, yeah.
Yeah, especially knowing Norway like I do, they exist somewhere. Even
they
if
have
you haven't seen them yet, They
They have
either
to.
existed at one point as some side project somebody did, or we just haven't heard of them yet.
Yeah, we need that band out in public.
And then, of course, you have bands that are just fun, like Ailstorm.
Oh yeah, I've listened to quite a bit of them. Let me see. I
Where
like
it's just a
Black.
bunch of Scotsmen being drunk and stupid.
Yeah, exactly. There's quite a few songs of theirs I like too, especially when you're drinking. Good
Yeah,
music
and
to listen to when you're
the
drinking.
coolest part about metal as a genre is there's room for all that. Like you have your super progressive or like super deep lyricists creating like really impactful pieces on like philosophy or politics or whatever, or religion especially. And then you have the bands that are just out there to have a good time
Yeah.
and do so. And bands that exist basically to either make fun of the genre or make fun of themselves, like Steel Panther.
Trying to think of another one like that. There's so Austrian Death
Glory
Machine
Hammer.
back in the day. Austrian Death Machine back in the day.
Austrian Death Machine is fantastic. Death Clock.
Oh yeah, Death Clock's another good one. Yeah. Yeah.
Or in terms of like kind of tongue in cheek, but still part of the genre, Glory Hammer for power metal. Or the best words I have to describe that is just Space Scotland.
Gotta listen to it. That sounds like an awesome idea.
One of the song titles, I believe, is The Unicorn Invasion of Dundee.
Gotta hear it. That's just too good to pass up.
Yeah. It's actually like pretty musically good too, and just not to. Yeah, I was about to bring up Primus because I actually saw them live not too long ago. They're still really good. In fact, they weren't just doing their own stuff; they were doing that. They'd like have a set of their stuff, and then A Farewell to Kings by Rush. The whole record, which was awesome, because that's one of my favorite Rush albums too. And they did a really good job of it, because apparently Les is a huge Rush fan, and they actually got to tour with them. Which that's got to be a really cool moment when you're touring with a band that you grew up listening to. It's like, guys, we're playing with them. Like, remember when we were all hanging out in high school, jamming out and listening to these guys? Yeah, they're on stage.
Yeah.
And in some cases, like, they'll outshine in terms of popularity. They'll outshine the bands that they were influenced by. But no, I mean, this one, I think, for a last album, I think it's really kind of an interesting one in that, well, it's the last album so far. This isn't the first time they've taken a long break. So maybe we'll get another one in the future, especially if Judas Priest is on a hiatus or whatever. I think you'll see Scott come back, and I think Paul would be down to do more.
Good.
And I would hope at least that this is not the last we hear from them.
Me too. I hope.
Because this isn't the most solid record I've heard from them, but it's still got some brilliant points to it. And overall, I'd still give it like a 7.5 and 8.
I give it an 8 personally, but I lean more toward this side of it than you do. As far as
I lean more
style.
towards the earlier to middle period, where it's a lot more kind of experimental, a lot more speed metal than it is this. But that I also have the trauma of having grown up in the late 80s and early 90s when new metal was becoming a thing.
Well, I did too, but this one really grew on me. I don't know why, but this particular album grew on me.
True. I've only heard this one in its entirety a couple of times, so maybe I'll just have to spin it a few more times and kind of really come to grips with it. Because
after the third time, I was like, you know what, they got me. That's how it was.
There were parts that like reached out and grabbed at me. It's just not the whole thing as a unified piece.
No, there's a couple of them I just can't get behind, but most of it is pretty good.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear some live versions of it too and see how it sounds when they're doing it live rather than on this particular mix of it, because that can make a big difference too.
You're right.
People who think production doesn't have that big an impact, you have no idea.
Yeah, you're right. I would love to see that. And hopefully they come back and do that.
Yeah, hopefully. And, even if this is the last we hear from them, they had 5 really, really kick-ass records. And especially as kind of a glorified side project to a lot of these guys, this band is better than, I'd say, 80 or 90% of the side projects I've heard.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too.
And like, especially as a Paul Gilbert and Scott Travis, just kind of side collaboration when they're not busy with their own bands. This is super high quality. And, guys in the chat, you've been saying that you've been listening to them this whole time. And man, you can hear what we're talking about, where for a band that really never went anywhere, these guys are better than they had any right to be.
Yeah. It is
And
a
I think
lot more credit than they got.
Yeah, I think it's a crime that these guys never really got the attention that they richly deserved.
Crime against heavy metal.
Although at the same time, that also means that when you hear a guy mention Racer X, you know they know what they're talking about. Because this is not that band that like everyone's like, oh yeah, I listen to Metallica. It's like, when you hear somebody mention Racer X, it's like, okay, you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like you obviously know the genre if you know who these guys are. But that's part of whatever fandom you want to be in. That I think is a special thing when
Thank you,
you mentioned like the Deep Lore to somebody and they're like, "Ooh, okay, this guy's an expert." Now I know who I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think a lot more people need to notice this band, and that's why like I do shows like this to shine a light on them. And you know what? Play it for your friends. Play it for people who are into the genre. Share this stream out with people that you think might be into it. To hear two guys who really are just talk about the band, because a lot of the bands I got into because people I knew who listened to them were really passionate about it and really dug it. I'm like, okay, well, let's give it a shot.
Well, I've tried to share this out to my two brothers. One of them hopefully is watching now, and hopefully the other one will watch later. And hopefully they'll like it as much as I do. I think they will.
Yeah, and as ever, like we want to hear recommendations for new bands to listen to, because like my favorite shows that I've done are albums that I haven't heard yet.
That's right.
And stuff that in a way, it's a lot more difficult for me to go back and listen to stuff I know very well and listen more critically and like really say much about it, because it's just stuff I've either grown up with or I love to death. And where it's like the more obscure stuff I've never listened to, I can really dig into it and be like, okay, yeah, all right. And there's an element of risk there, and I've never heard it. It could be really good, could be really bad, but either way, I learned.
I recently did that with Star Trek, ironically, the music of it. I listened to Star Trek the Motion Picture soundtrack and Star Trek Wrath of Khan soundtrack side by side to see which one out.
One of the best OSTs I've ever heard being the motion picture.
That's what I came out with.
Jerry Goldsmith is an absolute freaking master.
For the first half of my life, 2 all the way. Star Trek 2, Wrath of Khan soundtrack. After I listened to it the last time, I was like, you know what? You got to give it to Jerry Goldsmith.
No, I will say Wrath of Khan is the better movie. The soundtrack, though, I will give it to the motion picture.
I give Wrath of Khan the better action, but I like the plot of one better, ironically.
I like the motion picture better because it's more Star Trek and more what the fans needed to see after a decade of having no Trek at all. Especially that scene with the Enterprise and Space Dock when you see the ship for the first time.
Yeah.
It's just straight up starship porn, and I'm there for it. Like, they knew exactly what they were doing, showing you every line of the new one, just showing off the new real high res model.
And that's also why I like it better. You're right there with me. And before I did used to like Star Trek 2 better, and even in that regard. But now, as I've gotten older, 1 is just where it's at for me.
Yeah, and it's one of the ones that I keep coming back to today, like to the point where I have this right on my desk right here. One of the first things I ever took out of the box when I set up my new place. The Eagle Moss 1701 model. I really refit.
The refit. Oh, man.
One of, if not my favorite starship in any genre of any type, period. The Constitution refit is one of the most gorgeous starships of all time. Fight me.
I have 2 favorites. They're tied. The refit, that's tied for the Excelsior for me.
That's interesting, because usually like fans are on either like Team Excelsior or Team Constitution. Like, there's not a lot of guys who like both. I do. Like, the Excelsior was, I think, a really cool design and kind of a logical evolution of where Starfleet ships go.
That's why I can't decide between the refit and the Excelsior. You just pointed out why I can't figure it out. Why which one is better?
Yeah, and it's kind of I can see arguments on both sides. Like I can see it's usually the older fans too who have a problem with the Excelsior because they know what that ship was supposed to do.
Yeah,
and they're like, no, you're not replacing my Connie. Fuck off. Like I could see a lot of Tomcat drivers looking at the Super Hornet that way. I'm just like, I know what that thing is. You can fuck right off.
well, I have to say the old timers got a point. It didn't reach transwarp.
It's true.
I
mean, due to some, maybe tactical fuckery on the part of a certain Starfleet engineer. But, hey, they had to get away somehow, right?
That's right.
Yep, and we're going to do a show on Diamond Head at some point because they're a fantastic band that, again, doesn't get enough attention. Even though some of their songs have been covered by other bands and became absolute smash hits, like Am I Evil by Metallica, which is actually a cover of Diamond Head. And they actually did a re-recorded version of it in 2020 that's absolutely monstrous. And they did a whole bunch. They did like a bunch of their early stuff from their first album, Lightning to Nations. And then they did some cover stuff. Like they did the Immigrant Song by Zeppelin and Sinner by Judas Priest. And they did a fantastic job of all of it. And we'll get to them eventually. They're on my list. I have a whole list of songs or bands that we'll get to. But for now, and now that I'm in the new house, we can actually start to go down that rabbit hole and get to some of it. Rather than me just kind of focusing on getting everything set up. And hopefully you guys will be with me for that. But I think that does it for this band because unfortunately they didn't have the longest career. Well, they had a longer career, but not much in the way of output.
Yeah.
In terms of other bands that have been around as long as they have. But like I said, hopefully maybe someday in the future we'll get another entry from them. And if they do, you will see my ass in this chair screaming about it from the rooftops.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
In fact, you might even be able to audibly hear me from wherever you are.
I'll join you, man, because I want to hear that. I want to hear that.
That would be kick ass. Oh. But as for that, what do you got going on in the works, man?
Well, I've got a little channel on Odyssey that I've been doing some gaming on, considering doing movie reviews. Just need people like you to come on, talk about things. Talked about Star Trek. That'll be something I would love to do, especially the motion picture. Would love to review that.
In fact, I have the vinyl album of the motion picture OST somewhere around here. I'll have to find it.
Yeah, that would be great. Just the soundtrack, the movie or the soundtrack, or even both. Anything.
Yeah, they're both fantastic. Movie. And you can tell that the soundtrack was great because it became the theme for Star Trek going forward for the next 50 years.
Yeah, everybody thinks that's the theme to The Next Generation. No, it's not. That's the theme to the motion picture.
Yeah, that became the sound of Star Trek from then on.
Yeah.
But no, man, I would love to be part of that. And I've been looking into doing some, stuff over on alternative platforms too. Like I have my Twitch channel that I never upload to anymore because I'm not even sure my internet can take it.
Yeah.
But I may play around with that. I keep threatening to play some more BattleTech or something like that over there. So maybe I'll do that at some point.
The Hairbrained Schemes version?
Yep, the HBS.
I actually own that. Maybe that's something we could do.
I don't know that that's a co-op game, unfortunately. Or we could we can do skirmish mode, I think.
I think we can, yeah.
That would be interesting to do a actual PvP Irby Derby.
Yeah.
Each side gets 4 urban mechs and may the best trash cans win.
Yeah. Pretty sure you will. Pretty awful at the game, but it'll be fun.
Well, that's the point of the urban mech. It's not about being good at BattleTech. It's just about doing funny shit and hoping it works.
Yeah. Like Saints Row games. Those are fun too.
Yeah. But no, that'd be pretty cool. As for me, like I said, next week we will be doing the well, next week we might not have a show because of Christmas, or if we do, it'll be, you know, in the midweek sometime between Christmas and New Year's. And then the week of New Year's, we'll be doing a show on our top 3 metal albums of the year. Being the entire panel of you know, my usual suspects and whoever else can come on. And I'd love to hear see in the comments of this video what some of yours were. Maybe we'll listen to them, and maybe we haven't heard them, and we'll add them to the list. And we'll go over it live. Yeah, because I'd love to hear what some of you guys think about not only albums you've listened to that I haven't, or maybe some of the stuff that you discovered on this channel and
Merry Christmas.
ended up loving. Yeah, Merry Christmas, Soul. And to everybody out there, hope you guys have a great Christmas. Hope you guys have a great New Year too, if we don't see you. And in the meantime, take care, stay safe. I love you all, and I'll catch you next time.